Nanguo Ziqi sat in stillness and seemed to forget himself. His disciple nervously asked him, "Why do you sit like dead ashes and withered wood?" He replied, "You fool, I almost lost myself just now. How could you know anything of this?" He went on to describe the sound of the wind blowing through the orifices of the earth, the trees and the sky, describing vast emptiness, a metaphor for the practice of seated meditation. This story is from the second chapter of Zhuangzi. It's called Adjustment of Controversies. It's about a hermit named Nanguo Ziqi, who is practicing seated meditation, and he seems to forget himself, but he's disturbed by his disciple or by his attendant, who's concerned that he's died. And so Nanguo Ziqi gives him a lecture about what happened when he was meditating, right? So it seems like he'd completely lost himself and forgotten himself, but then at the same time, he'd become fully cognizant of everything happening around him, all of the subtle sounds of the wind flowing through every different portal of the earth and the trees and so on, right? The basic idea is that through meditation and through self-forgetting, one can come to the realization, actually, of a much more clear understanding of the reality around them. This is the essential characteristic of Daoist meditation practice, but especially Zuo-wang, sitting and forgetting. This chapter, or this discussion from Zhuangzi's Nanhua Jing, right? That's what the book Zhuangzi is called, Nanhua Jing, the classic of Southern excellence. It defines perfectly the act of sitting and forgetting. So that's what today's episode is going to be about, sitting and forgetting. Sitting and forgetting, or Zuo-wang, is a kind of Daoist meditation practice which maybe goes back as far or farther than Zhuangzi. So maybe at least like 2,300 years, if not longer. Now, it's been called by different names at different times in history. And so Zhuangzi himself, in his book Nanhua Jing, called it Xinzhai Zuo-wang. So Xinzhai means heart fasting. What does heart fasting mean? Fasting means abstaining from food. Heart means the mind or the awareness. So heart fasting means that you abstain from the activities of the mind. You abstain from thinking. And then Zuo-wang means sitting and forgetting. So Xinzhai Zuo-wang means fasting the mind and sitting and forgetting. That's what Zhuangzi originally called it. However, this practice was latent in Chinese culture for hundreds of years. Other Daoist practices became more popular during the Han Dynasty until around the Sui Dynasty. There were particular reasons for that, but basically, Daoism has two competing thoughts about how energetic practice should work. One thought works according to it's called the school of Pengzu. Pengzu is supposed to be the person a long time ago who created Daoyin, so stretching and bending and this kind of practices, breathing exercises, bedroom arts, etc., right? These are associated with a very ancient legendary figure named Pengzu. And then there's another school which is sitting in stillness, which is, I don't think that it's necessarily associated with one particular person. The Daoists like to say that it was passed down by somebody named Guangchengzi. Guangchengzi is another legendary figure who was a deity who came to Earth to teach the Yellow Emperor. And it's said that he taught the Yellow Emperor, you could say he taught him Zuo-wang, or he taught him Neidan, right? He taught him some kind of meditation technique. So whether these apocryphal stories have any merit to them or not, basically there's always been a conversation and a tension between more active practices like Daoyin and Tuna breath work, visualization and things like this, and with meditation, which is done in a seated posture usually and in stillness. A lot of meditation people have rejected Daoyin and these other arts, and a lot of Daoyin people have sought to amend their practices with meditation over time. So today we're talking about Zuo-wang, though, right? Sitting and forgetting. And in Zuo-wang, the first prominent master to promote this practice, his name was Sima Chengzhen. Sima Chengzhen. If I'm not wrong, I think he lived in the 600s or maybe a little bit before the 600s. And he was a Daoist from the Shangqing school. He was considered to be the sixth patriarch of the highest clarity school of Taoism. Sima Chengzhen was a member of the Sima family. So the Sima family was a famous culture-bearing family in China. A lot of these early figures who we associate with Taoism, but maybe outside of Taoism too, people like the Sima family, people like the Ge family, so Ge Hong, Ge Xuan, people like the Wei family, right, and so on and so forth, right? There were these big families of elite people who had been aristocracy during the Chinese Han Dynasty, who carried a lot of cultural items and cultural activities with them after the decline of the Han Dynasty. So this Sima Chengzhen is actually in a lineage from Sima Qian, who was the court historian in the in the Han Dynasty. So Sima Qian was actually the person who wrote the biography of Li Er, the person who wrote the biography of Lao Tzu. So that's an interesting feature about Daoist history or internal practice history, is that it goes back through these various family lines. Sima Chengzhen was the descendant of Sima Qian, the court historian. So Sima Chengzhen, he established the idea that you could realize the Tao by sitting and forgetting. And he wrote two major works about that topic. One is called Zuo-wang, the discussion of sitting and forgetting. And, essentially it's instruction about how to meditate apophatically, right? How to perform self-forgetting meditation. The second one was called Tianyinzi, the Heavenly Hermit. Now, it's interesting because Tianyinzi has more practices associated with it than just Zuo-wang. There's more than just sitting and forgetting. What it tries to do is establish a method where you can practice some self-massage in order to loosen your body up. You can sit and imagine your entire body, or what he says is you use your inner eye and then you're able to see your entire body. He doesn't explain how to do the practice though. It just sort of gives a hint about how to do it. And then after you can, have a awareness of your entire body, then you can sit in forgetting and you can enter into emptiness. So that's a really interesting thing. Basically, he was the person who pioneered this Zuo-wang style of meditation, sitting and forgetting style of meditation. So even though it's present in the Zhuangzi, and as we've seen, it's actually mentioned in different contexts in different parts of the Nanhua Jing. You see it in at the start, right in the second chapter, the adjustment of controversies, but you see it later on too. So in adjustment of controversies, it's never discussed as Zuo-wang. It never says, oh, it's sitting and forgetting, but he says, wo sang wo. It's like I lost myself, or I disappeared, right? That's one of the things that Nanguo Ziqi says in one of the passages. So that he's sitting in this meditative posture, and he seems to disappear. That's the outcome of the practice. And then later on, Zhuangzi talks also about Zhai Xin Zuo-wang. So it's prominent in Zhuangzi, but it wasn't really practiced that much until Sima Chengzhen. So that's like, by my count, it's almost 800 years later. Right? If Sima Chengzhen was sometime around the 600s, Zhuangzi was probably about maybe 300 BC or even before. So you get the idea. It was a number of centuries, and it's not clear why that's the case. But for whatever reason, maybe I think it's because of the impact of Buddhism in China. I think Daoist practice really emphasized physical cultivation and energetic cultivation because it seems to lead to longevity. And you have to understand that the people who created these longevity practices were not Daoists originally, right? So the people who created Daoyin, they predated the Daoists. And actually, early Daoists broadly rejected things like Daoyin, right? So it was later generations of Daoists that began to bring those practices into the Daoist system. In a way, you can think of Daoism as almost like a container for many kinds of Chinese self-cultivation practice that don't fit perfectly into Confucianism or Buddhism. But I think that when Buddhism came to China and emphasized seated meditation to the exclusion of other practices, I believe that the Daoists had to play catch up with them. And that's one of the reasons why Sima Chengzhen, who, by the way, worked in the royal court. I think it was the Tang. I think he was in the early Tang dynasty. He worked in the royal court as the Daoist, and so he had a great deal of political sway. And in my opinion, personally, part of his development of a comprehensive Daoist seated meditation regimen was probably something to do with the Daoists having to compete with the Buddhists, because there was a lot of competition, and the Daoists borrowed from Buddhists and the Buddhists borrowed from Daoists. This is, that part's well-known history. My own conjecture is just my conjecture, but that's what I think may be the case. But anyway, regardless of that, Sima Chengzhen was the person who broadly introduced Zuo-wang as a method rather than sort of as a generalized suggestion in Zhuangzi. Now, so then going on from there, what does Zuo-wang entail, right? What's the idea of the practice? Today, there's more than one received version of Zuo-wang, but broadly speaking, here's how the theory works. When you sit in meditation and you forget your body and you forget your thoughts and you forget yourself completely, you enter into a state that can be called by various names, hundun or huntun, right? To be in primordial chaos, or like the primordial state, or they can say like yao ming ming, right? Like in deep in darkness, right? Lao Tzu says yao ming ming qi zhuang you jing. In the center of profound darkness is essence. That's sort of like the idea. You go into a very, very deep meditative state, very peaceful, and it seems like there's nothing there. But then that's not the desired outcome, actually. That's a part of the process. If you read the Dao De Jing, Taoism in some ways is a really, really clever system of thought. So the Dao De Jing, everybody knows about Wu Wei, non-action. And a lot of people know about Wei Wu Wei, right? Acting without action. Or Wu Wu Wei, nothing is not acted upon. What that means is everything is acted upon. But do you know how the system works in meditation? That's actually the big secret. And so it's when you enter into a sense of non-being, right? So there's no self there. Everything is gone in darkness, right? It's not sleeping, but it's not awake either. It seems like there's nothing present, right? Then after that can be considered as wu wei, or non-action. But then what precipitates from that is eventually you have to come back to regular consciousness. So that's when wei wu wei, or wei wu wei, right? Acting without action occurs. When acting without action occurs, it means that there's a spontaneous physiological and mental process that's instantiated in the deep meditation state. And, maybe you could view it as being sort of similar to how the circadian rhythm functions, right? Like when you go to sleep at night, you don't sleep forever, hopefully, right? You eventually wake up the next morning because your body tells you physiologically it's time to wake up. And a number of discrete processes happen while you're in the process of waking up, right? It's not like you wake up all at once. Body systems start turning on. You enter into REM sleep, leaving deep sleep and enter into REM sleep. You have dreams, and then maybe you wake up once and then you go back to sleep for a while, and then you wake up again, and then you slowly get up, right? There's a whole process that needs to unfold. And even though it unfolds differently every night, it's still approximately the same, right? If you're a relatively healthy person, you establish a time to go to bed and you establish a time to wake up, and your body eventually just gets into the flow of following those conditions. Well, meditation is exactly the same in Taoism, or in, Zuo-wang, right? You meditate and you enter into this state of deep peace and internal self-forgetting, but gradually it comes back. And when it comes back, it's happening in the pre-heaven state, in the xian-tian, right? It's not happening in the post-heaven state, in the hou-tian. And you don't know what's happening because it's happening subconsciously. It's happening on a physical level, but not on the level that you register, because during that time you're not there. And then when the post-heaven state comes back and you regain regular consciousness, then for some reason that seems to cause the spirit to spark, right? And so the theory of Zuo-wang basically is you sit in this apophatic state of non-being for a certain period of time, then all of a sudden, it seems like the lights turn on spiritually and you awaken. But when you awaken, it's not the same for a while as the original way that you were, right? The original way you were identifying with the body, identifying with your thoughts. Everything is very real in the material world, right? Three-dimensional objects are all what they really are. But the interesting thing about emerging from meditation in Zuo-wang, or in Neidan, if you get to a reasonably good level, is that the spiritual awareness becomes distinct and dominant. So the thoughts are not dominant. Self-identification is not dominant. Only clear and perfect and open spiritual awareness that has no three-dimensional physical quality and no temporal quality, right? So you are awakened to consciousness, but you don't feel bound by physical things, by the body, by thoughts, or by time for a while. And that's the process. It can be called Ming Xin Jian Xing, right? To become illuminated to the nature of your heart or to the nature of your spirit, and to be able to come into contact with your innate nature, right? So it's not the innate nature that you become in contact with. Of course, how could you possibly become in contact with your innate nature? But your heart achieves this illumination and clarification and opening, and then you stay like that for a while. And, maybe if you're a beginner, it's a very short period of time. But as you get more advanced, you could stay like that for minutes, or if you're very, very advanced, for hours or days, right? Most of us are not going to stay like that for days. But just as an example, I'm sure that have been people in the past who have. Or hopefully maybe even stay there permanently, right? Who knows? So this is the basic idea of what's supposed to happen as a result of practicing Zuo-wang properly. Now, Qi can also move. You can have a feeling of Qi. But what is Qi, right? I had somebody comment on the Neidan video. He said, these things are fake. Quit talking this nonsense. But they're not fake, right? The Qi feeling actually is a real feeling. The mental clarification thing is a real clarification. We don't know why it happens. My teacher says that he thinks it might be hormones, or, I think Jiang Wei Qiao in the text, a modern text called Yin Shi Zi Jing Zuo Lun, which is a very good text. Actually, it's got an English translation. He seemed to think that it was related to the nervous system and the brain. Zhao Bichen, one of the other really modern famous people in Neidan who founded the Qianfeng school, he also thought that it was related to the brain and nervous system. So there's a lot of different ways of thinking about it out there, but the Qi is a sensation in the body, right? It's a feeling that happens and it moves along a certain predetermined pathway. It's not just made up, but it might not be, right? It's probably not bioelectric energy, and it might not be, magical energy from the gods or energy from the Tao even, right? The Tao is a way of talking about this process, but it doesn't have to be real for the process to happen, right? It's just people had this experience and then they attached the words to it. But if you want to interpret the words in a literal sense, this is the problem, is that at present, we're very couched in sort of materialist science. So a word is meant to describe something very accurately. And so the description of the thing actually becomes associated with the function of the thing. But in ancient cultures across the board, they never had such a literal concept about words, right? A word describes something, that's fine. But if you read Daoist books, they say very upfront, right? The strongest word I can use to describe it is the Tao. But actually, the Tao doesn't even describe what this thing is, right? And the same with Qi. It's a feeling in the body. It moves around the body, and it could be caused by any kind of number of different, complex pathways. And it doesn't have to be some sort of intrinsic, energy or anything like that. We just use the word energy to describe this thing that we don't know what it is, but we can feel. Maybe someday people will be able to measure Qi. I would suspect that looking at hormones and looking at the relationship between the three dominant parts of the nervous system would probably be a good place to start. So anyway, this effect comes and, generally the practitioner sits in a sense of emptiness and openness. And you could say it's like the realization of the innate self, right? The innate self is present. And this actually, I think, is approximately the same as what Buddhists experience, like, when they experience Kensho, right? If you practice Zen, you experience a glimpse of enlightenment. I think it's approximately the same thing, to be honest. They get there through different methods, but they're able to both elicit this effect. So that's approximately how Zuo-wang works. Now, is there any Zuo-wang still happening in contemporary times, right? Daoist practice is so difficult to put your hand on because there's so many different varieties and people have different ideas about it, right? My understanding is that today many Daoist religious people formally practice Zuo-wang, but you don't have to be a religious person to practice it. Actually, the most popular variation of Zuo-wang today was established by Chen Yingning. Chen Yingning was the major secular figure of Taoism in the 20th century, and he established Daoist internal alchemy and other related Daoist practices among the commons in China, so that more people had access to them. And Chen Yingning popularized something which he calls Zhuangzi Zhai Xin Fa, right? So the Zhuangzi is the person who wrote the Nanhua Jing. Zhai Xin, remember that, heart fasting, and Fa, which means method. So he said that you should practice in the same way that Zhuangzi advocated. So how does that work? Well, essentially, you monitor your breath and use your breath to return to stillness. There's more to it than that. And I'll be posting a translation of it in my subscribers only section on my Substack. Plug. So you can, I'll put the link to my Substack and you can go over and check it out if you want to. There's also tons of free articles about all kinds of different practices in Taoism and Confucianism and Chinese Buddhism. So certainly, I think it's worth checking out if you're interested in these things. But basically, the bottom line is Chen Yingning thought that you should follow the breath, right? You sit back comfortably and meditate peacefully. And just observe your inhalation and exhalation and become more peaceful. And so that's probably the most popular version of Zuo-wang today. You just become more and more peaceful and more calm until you seem to disappear. And then eventually those positive benefits of returning from the primordial chaos state will occur. And, you will have learned the basic practice of Zhai Xin Fa. This incidentally is also practiced by a lot of Daoists today, a lot of religious Daoists, and many of them don't know that it comes from Chen Yingning. But Chen Yingning was deeply involved, as was his disciple Hu Haiya, deeply involved in the China Daoist Research Association. Chen Yingning was actually a co-founder, and so that Daoist Research Association that's next to the White Cloud Temple in Beijing, Hu Haiya was the co-founder and he was the vice president, and his disciple Hu Haiya, I believe, actually held the presidential role during the 1980s. And so a lot of those practices which people take for granted, Zuo-wang, Neidan, these kind of things, actually emanated from the secular realm and were brought into Daoist temples partially as a result. I'm not saying the Daoists didn't have similar practices, but you can come across Zhuangzi Zhai Xin Fa. That one is Chen Yingning's practice that re-entered Daoism. So to summarize, right, Zuo-wang is a genre of seated meditation, which is popular in Daoism. It has maybe up to or beyond 2,300 years of history. It's first mentioned in Zhuangzi in the chapter Adjustment of Controversies, when the hermit Nanguo Ziqi explains to his disciple what happened when he was meditating. And then also later in the Zhuangzi, when he talks about Zhai Xin Zuo-wang, then it was popularized in the early Tang dynasty by Sima Chengzhen, who both wrote the Zuo-wang Lun, Discussion of Sitting and Forgetting, and Tian Yinzi, the Heavenly Hermit. And then later on, it was practiced by various people. I should mention, that Wang Chongyang, the founder of the complete reality school of Taoism, was very fond of Zuo-wang. He was very fond of sitting and forgetting. And he used it as part of his internal alchemy practice. So Wang Chongyang actually has, in one of his texts, I think it's the 15 Discussions of Wang Chongyang, he has a afterword, which is called the Zuo-wang Lu, or the Zuo-wang Ming, the stele of sitting and forgetting. So Wang Chongyang also applied sitting and forgetting in his practice. It was carried on through Taoism. And in the 20th century, Chen Yingning, he established something called Zhuangzi Zhai Xin Fa, so the Zhuangzi method of fasting the heart. And he especially thought that it was useful for people who were undergoing medical treatment. So he thought that it was useful for people in the rehabilitation process of illness. And it was taught actually in Chinese hospitals. It's part of contemporary Qigong also. Him and his disciple Hu Haiya called it Jingong, stillness practice. And so this was argued to be one part of contemporary Qigong, although it's become less popular in the Qigong scene today because people are typically more focused on moving practices. So then it's been carried on today, partially as a result of Chen Yingning's influence and partially as a result of Daoist influences and other researchers. And it's one of the more common, more popular, and easier to practice forms of Daoist meditation. There are quite a number of different people who teach it and different schools. Some of them are religious, some of them are secular. It's a pretty easy practice. If you'd like to learn more about it, then you can go to my Substack and read the article about Zuo-wang. Now, I'm going to be posting that with this video in it, which means that when the video first comes out, the link will just be to my Substack, Immortality Study. But then once the post is made, then I'll switch the link so that it actually links to the article. And the article will have a little bit of bonus material behind the paywall. So if you want to join my Substack, I highly encourage you to. But only if you think it's useful, of course. And so that's that's my little talk on Zuo-wang. I hope it was useful to you. And here at Qigong Project, I'm just going to keep making different videos about different aspects of Qigong practice and Taiji Chuan and meditation in the Chinese tradition, from Taoism and Buddhism and Confucianism, modern Qigong and everything in between, maybe even Chinese medicine. So if you like it, then make sure to like and subscribe. And hopefully I'll see you in the next video.